Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I hope you are having a fabulous morning already. I know you may just be getting started or you may have been at it already quite a bit this morning. If you're just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I am a mom, a nana, a girlfriend, a wellness advocate, studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling, an activewear boutique owner and fanatic, jazzerciser, line dancer, lots of things. I like to stay active, and I have spent most of my life in a battle at different levels, depending on the time, with anxiety and depression, and have learned that not only does sharing my story and little tidbits of it help others, but talking to others and getting their tidbits helps me too, which is why I started Wellness Wednesday, so that we could share information. And it's a broad topic, so there's a lot of things that can be covered under wellness and a lot of things that overlap. So I always encourage when I'm on here to please feel free to comment, ask questions, share your own tips about whatever we're talking about, so that I can learn from you too, so that others can learn from both of us. And I think this is a great forum to do it. So if you're here, let me know you're here. And if you don't see this till afterwards, hit hashtag replay in the comments or ask a question, drop a comment. Sometimes I don't always see all the things. Sometimes I see eyeballs and your little face bubbles. Sometimes I see your comments. Sometimes Facebook doesn't show me anything. So if I don't respond while I'm on, it's just because I didn't see it, and I will get back to you when I'm done. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed last week's video. If you watched last week's video, I had gone to Residency, which I'll explain more about in a minute if you don't know what that is. And I came back with lots of experience, but also the crud. And school was starting here where I live last week. And so the crud was going to start going around because that's typical. So it seemed like a good time to talk about that side of wellness, about how we can prevent things and increase our immune system. Not necessarily prevent, because not everything's always preventable, but boost our immune system, maybe get through things a little faster, maybe not get hit as hard. So if you didn't see that video and you want to, let me know. I'll drop the link for that video in the comments. And in the meantime, I'm feeling better. It's still trying to hang on a little bit, so I still have that morning yuckiness that takes a little bit to move out. So if I sound a little weird, sometimes it's still trying to hold on. But this week I can finally talk a little bit about my residency. So if you don't know what that is, for clinical mental health students, residency is an opportunity for us to get together face to face and actually practice skills on each other, not on clients, on mock clients, where we each role play to help our colleague or our fellow students practice the skills that we're learning. Obviously, if you're a doctor, you wouldn't practice on a patient right out of the gate, or if you're studying to be a doctor, and the same thing applies here with counseling. But before we went, so this was our first residency. In my school, it's all online. So this was our very first opportunity since I started grad school in October to get face-to-face with other like-minded individuals, colleagues, future colleagues, to actually practice real-life skills with critique and observation from people that are trained to train us. So it was really exciting, and it was a little scary. All right, there were times where it was a lot scary, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that today. And we got some tips before we went over there, tips for surviving residency, which ironically, in my previous life as an executive officer, when we would go to conferences, we would also be given tips to survive that conference, because those can be fairly stressful events. So this was the same idea, tips to survive residency. And I actually posted those a few weeks ago before I went, because I found it interesting that most of those tips are things that I felt could be applied to regular life. So I want to talk more about that. And I also want to talk a little bit, some of this is going to touch on the imposter syndrome that inevitably reared its ugly head when I headed over to residency and got ready to step out of my comfort zone. So one of the first tips was to be open and receptive and allow yourself to learn new ideas. Now, as I go through these, if you follow regularly and you watch me regularly, you're going to find some tremendous overlap. I mean, I talk about this stuff all the time, but it always amazes me when I see certain core things creep back into every single topic. So, the first tip was to be open and receptive and allow yourself to learn new ideas. And that's about keeping an open mind, because when you step into a situation like this, or anytime you step out of your comfort zone, you are introducing yourself and exposing yourself to new people, new ideas, new concepts, new opinions. When you're getting out of your normal circle, you are opening yourself up to experience and be experienced by others. So that always comes with new feedback. Sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive, sometimes that feedback just kind of happens depending on the situation. Sometimes in the case of this residency, you know that feedback's coming. You know that feedback's coming from your professors, because here's the thing about clinical mental health counseling. It's not just about the grades. And the grades aren't just about the academic ability. They are also about the skills. You have to exhibit the skill set. And if you are lacking in a part of the skill set that's important, you have to show improvement, or you can actually be dismissed from the program, because that is such a crucial part of becoming a clinical mental health counselor. So you walk into this knowing you're going to get feedback of some sort from your professors, possibly from your fellow students. And then anytime you're in any kind of a new situation where you're exposing yourself to new people, you're going to get some type of feedback either anyway, whether it's good, bad, unsolicited, solicited, whatever. So it's important to keep an open mind, and recognize that you have stepped out of your comfort zone and you're in this new experience, whatever it is. And because you need to learn something, you either need to learn something about somebody else, about yourself, both, whatever. So it's important to embrace the learning as an essential and continuous process. And you all know, if you've followed me regularly, you know my thoughts on this. You know that I truly believe that if I'm not constantly learning new things, if I make up my mind that I know everything I need to know, that is the first step to stagnating. That's the first step to being in a rut, and to not continuing. I don't want to say finishing, because I don't really feel like I'm ever really finished in the process of my mental and emotional evolution. But the minute that I start thinking, or that we start thinking that we know everything we need to know, that is the beginning of the end, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of evolution and continuous growth. So it is also normal in these situations to feel inadequate. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. It's normal to feel inadequate when we're out of our comfort zone. Growth comes from pushing through that. It does not come from staying in our comfort zone. And this is something I experience on a regular basis. I used to have some very heavy duty anxiety, and more so, I used to have some very heavy duty social anxiety. That doesn't go away. It just becomes controlled when you work at it. And for me, situations like this are often where it rears its head, especially since I'm working remotely online for the most part. I do get out and about with work, but most of it is remote and online, and school is online. So I'm not out in the general public as much as I used to be. So I tend to, throw a little tantrum. Like, I don't want to go, we've talked before about how I sometimes force myself to go to networking mixers and things like that, because it's been a busy week at home. I haven't been able to go out in the public. And so by day 4 or 5 in a row, I'm like, I have opportunities too. And I'm like, no, I don't want to see people. I don't want to. And here's what that boils down to. It boils down to, when I'm not forcing myself out of my comfort zone on a regular basis, I get comfortable, I get complacent, and I get nervous, and I start overthinking, and I start dreading. I start telling myself that people are going to judge me. And that is part of that imposter syndrome that I've talked about before. And I actually did a whole video on it. And if you want to see that, I can find it for you and tag you, or drop the link. But this dread is something that still rears its ugly head on a regular basis when I'm going to be around large groups of other people. When I go to my activewear summits, I'm going to be surrounded by other women, some who are going to look better than me and some who do things differently than me. And I always have to have this conversation with myself where I'm literally talking myself out of believing that other people are going to judge me for something. The way I look, what I wear, the weight I've gained. And in the process of going to this residency, as much as I've always been told that I'm a natural at this type of thing, and as much as I truly feel a calling from God to pursue this degree and pursue this field, I was walking into this residency in Orlando thinking, what am I doing here? I don't know what I'm doing. I probably shouldn't be doing this. What am I thinking? Those are the kinds of things that come with imposter syndrome when we know we have the skills, we know we have the knowledge, and we know we have the talent. We still convince ourselves that we are incapable and that other people are looking at us and judging us, and that we're going to get out there in the open, out of our comfort zone, and find out that we are not what we thought we were. I also sometimes call it sometimes I use the term big fish and little pond syndrome. Sometimes I use the term little fish and big pond syndrome. I was at my job for 21 years. I knew a lot, not everything. I'll never say everything of what there was to know about that job. I was considered kind of an expert in my circle. So I was the big fish in the little pond. But now I'm not there anymore. I'm branching out. I'm doing other things, but that also means the pond got bigger and I got smaller, if that makes sense. So that often feeds that imposter syndrome, and we start questioning, no matter how much we can find proof that we are good at something or that we are making the right choices or we're on the right track, we often find ourselves dreading and doubting when we're facing a new situation, and that is totally normal. So that is the first tip and how it relates to that imposter syndrome and what it was like. So the second tip was to spend time with the group outside of the classroom. Now, just recently I went through the fireworks series and we talked about building relationships. And this is where this spending time with the group outside of the classroom is important, because whether you are going to a conference for your job that is specific to your position, or whether you're going to a residency for school where you're practicing skills that's specific to what you're studying, you are getting into a new group of people. And this group of people, it's a different level. Many of my mentors teach in my business and in my personal development teach that you are the sum of the 5 people you surround yourself with. And I believe that to be true. So when we go to conferences or we go to something like this residency, when we are surrounding by ourselves with people who are where we want to be or where we just got to, or as opposed to, like I said, as opposed to if you're a big fish in a little pond, so you're the one on top, and you become the small fish in the bigger pond where you're equal or a little bit lower in what you've achieved or whatever, that's an opportunity to learn. That's an opportunity to learn from people who are where you want to be or who have been where you just got to for a little bit longer. That's not an opportunity. Some of what feeds that imposter syndrome is that desire to compare to them, but they're in a whole different place in our journey. So this is an opportunity, that team building and that networking is an opportunity to not only learn from these people and learn things that you might not have otherwise known, just like when we're sharing information here. Good morning, Miss Bonnie. Just like when we're sharing information here, we're learning from each other. Spending time with this group in and out of the classroom or conference or whatever the case may be is an opportunity to learn and to build relationships that may help us going forward. Those shared experiences lead to a deeper understanding of each other, of what we're doing, of where we want to be, and they also lead to long-term support systems. There's a reason in the school world, in the college world, why they call the group that I met with at residency, that's my cohort. Because as we go through these studies and these classes, we now know each other. We have established a relationship through having breakfast together and lunch together and maybe dinner outside of the residency. And separate chats that were built because of our gathering. We have now established relationships with each other where we can now rely on each other going forward and find support. And these people may turn into connections for us when we're ready to get out in the field. They might turn into consultations for us when we need help making an ethical decision in the counseling profession. And it's not, that doesn't just happen in counseling. Again, this happens every time. That's that building of relationships that happens whenever we step outside of our comfort zone and expose ourselves to new people that know more than we do. They've either been where we want to be for longer, or they've already gotten there, and we can learn from them if we're open to that and we don't convince ourselves that this is scary, because it is scary. But we muscle through it instead of convincing ourselves that this isn't an experience that we need. So being open-minded and spending time with those people, not just in the conference or in the classroom, but taking the time to get to know them outside of that structured setting is super important. And it helps to counter those feelings of self-doubt that come with imposter syndrome. And it really helps us to know that we're not alone. For example, like I said, when I was headed over there, I'm like, what am I thinking? I don't have the skills for this. What am I doing? I had a lot of self-doubt going on. And you know what I learned when I got into that group of like-minded people? Most of them were having the same exact issue. And even some of the ones that didn't say they were having that issue, you could see it. You could see that they were holding back, that they were nervous, that they were assessing the situation, trying to decide if they were going to open themselves up. So it is important to know we're not alone in whatever we're experiencing, especially when we're experiencing that self-doubt that comes with that imposter syndrome, when we start questioning whether or not we're qualified or knowledgeable enough or whatever to be doing what we're doing. So it's super important to make sure that we make those connections, not just inside of that group, but outside of that structured area as well. So the third tip for residency was to pay attention to every moment, because every moment will teach you something. And I loved this because I already knew it to be true. Good morning, Miss Ann. I learn all the time, sometimes not when it's in my face, but oftentimes when I reflect back, I see lessons in almost everything. And I'm grateful to God because I feel like He has given me the vision at this stage of my life and this stage of my evolution. I feel like I am benefited by the ability to see those lessons faster, sometimes when they're happening even, and I'm very grateful for that. So, yes, where was I? I was like, I have to have notes, y'all. I can't memorize all this. It would be weird. I'd sound like AI. So paying attention to every moment, because every moment will teach you something, is absolutely true. And sometimes you don't know in that moment that it's teaching you. This is where mindfulness and the value of being fully present becomes really important. And I have kind of a funny story to tell you about that. You guys know I'm huge on mindfulness. It takes daily practice to focus on what's in front of you, what's right in front of you, instead of what's happening in a month, what's happening in a year, what happened a year ago. It's really difficult, but extremely important to stay in the moment. So here's what happened. So part of the residency was that we all had to do these counseling role plays, and we had to do them in what was referred to as the fishbowl. So we split it off into small groups, and we did lots of practice on the side with feedback from our instructors and from each other. But then the final thing we had to accomplish during this residency was to do a full 20-minute role play as a counselor with a mock client, which was one of our cohorts pretending to be a client. Good morning, Miss Carla. And we had to do that in the middle of the circle of everyone in the room. Y'all, if you've ever had social anxiety, it doesn't get much scarier than that, right? So basically what was going to happen was, for example, me and my mock client were going to sit in two chairs facing each other with the rest of our cohort, the rest of our class in a circle around us, watching us, observing us and the instructors while we did this mock role play to practice our skills and demonstrate our skills. And woo, if you want to talk about an opportunity to really question yourself and your abilities, that's where it is. But how many times have you been in a situation where you've had to be in front of a group of people? How many of us have really learned about ourselves or our anxiety in those situations? Now, one of the things that I always, especially when I had social anxiety, it was always easier for me to talk to a group of strangers than it was for me to talk to a group of people I was acquainted with. Notice I didn't say friends, I said acquainted with. Because I think in the back of my mind, the logic that I used to muscle through it was, I'm not necessarily ever going to see these people again. Whereas if it was people I knew I was going to have to face them the next day. So if I screwed up, I was going to have to deal with that on a regular basis and be reminded of it. So anyway, it's time for me to do my role play. We're in this circle. Everybody's freaking out. I, oddly enough, was not freaking out, but there were actual physical signs of my anxiety, like an upset stomach, that I didn't realize till afterwards. Well, that's got to be what it is, because I've been unusually calm about all of this. Like my brain wasn't spinning like it used to in these type of situations. But I wasn't prepared to say, oh no, I'm not nervous at all. I've got this. I wasn't there. So my anxiety and my nervousness about this situation and about this fishbowl situation was manifesting itself in physical symptoms. That didn't have anything to do with being sick. That came afterwards. But like I said, it was a little bit of upset stomach. And when I left to go to the bathroom before it was my turn, I came back with dry mouth, and dry mouth is a classic symptom of anxiety for me. And I was like, why do I have dry mouth? I literally did not know that it was my nervousness about the situation manifesting itself in physical symptoms. So we did this fishbowl, and it was my turn. And I'm looking at my client, and within a couple of minutes, because I was trying to focus on my client and because I was trying to be present and in the moment, everybody else in the room pretty much literally disappeared. And I was just in this conversation with this person. Well, we knew that the dean was coming by the classroom to talk to us. And I heard the door open. I remember hearing the door open, and I remember hearing a little mumbling type whispering. I had no idea the dean stayed in the room. No idea. So not only did the dean stay in the room, but she proceeded to sit down behind me in the seat next to mine, where I had come from to sit in the fishbowl. So she was right behind me the whole time. I had no idea. I didn't know the dean stayed. I was totally absorbed in what I was doing, which is how I was supposed to be. So when I got done, after about the third time I heard myself make a mistake, I heard a mistake come out of my mouth, because there's actually specific things that you would assume counselors are supposed to do that we're not supposed to do, and they try to break us of that habit. So about the third time I heard something come out of my mouth that I wasn't supposed to say, she finally called time, because these were long role plays, and I just kind of threw myself in my chair, and I'm like, oh, thank God, because the third time I heard that word come out of my mouth, I was like, it has to be time to be done now, because I just didn't want to screw up anymore. That was my opinion. And everybody's laughing at me. Everybody's like, you're doing awesome. And then the instructor looks at me and goes, did you know the dean was here? And I was like, huh? And I wasn't computing. I said, well, I heard the door open and I heard some whispering, but I didn't think anything about it. And I went to turn around and go sit in my chair and realized I didn't know the woman sitting next to it. So if you want an example of what it's like to totally be in the moment, that is it. So as the instructor's saying something about our surprise guest, I sit down and I look over at the dean and I go, oh, you're the surprise guest. And what ended up happening was, so this may have seemed insignificant at the time, but what ended up happening was, not only was I able to prove to myself the ability to not to be in the moment and to not worry about those things and not focus on those things, but that dean gave me feedback. Nobody else in the class got it. I got feedback directly from the dean, and it was positive feedback. I got feedback directly from the dean about what she witnessed while I was in my role play, that I will carry with me. Feedback on something I didn't even know I was doing, something that I was instinctively doing. So that small, insignificant moment of that thing that I was doing in that role play, someone else pointed out, and I now realize that's a skill that I actually come by naturally. So obviously, like I said, every moment is a teaching moment. The last person in our cohort to do the role play literally sat down and before she got started said, I can feel all your eyes on me. So most of us were able to get ourselves out of that and focus on what we were doing, but not everybody. Some people really struggled with it and kind of got inside their own heads because they felt that fishbowl effect. But that's just proof that no matter what your situation, if you focus on what's in front of you, you can muscle through it. That was a very scary thing. That fishbowl concept was a very scary thing, but it's not going to go away. And there are just some things that if we want to do them, if we want to participate in our communities, be leaders in our communities, anything like that, we are sometimes going to be in a fishbowl. And sometimes we make ourselves feel like we're in a fishbowl even when we aren't. And if we can just focus on being mindful and value being in the present, it helps us to muscle through that. And it gives us less time to give into those negative self-perceptions that feed that imposter syndrome. Okay, so the next lesson, and this is going to run a little bit long, and I'm sorry. The next lesson is to trust the process and don't worry if it doesn't make sense right away. And that spins right off of what I just talked about. We rarely know what the outcome of anything we're doing is going to be. It is very rare that we know exactly what the outcome of what we're doing is going to be. So sometimes we just have to do the things and focus on the activity, not the results. And that's what we were doing in that fishbowl setting, was focusing on the activity and not the results. We knew we weren't coming out of this residency as professional, ready to go counsel somebody. I'm not coming out of that residency ready to counsel one of you. But we have to do the practice. We have to put in the work. And ironically, in my activewear business, I have mentors who talk about that on a regular basis. When we become so focused on the results that we're constantly in a spin of how we're going to get there, we're not actually doing the activities that get us there. So that applies across the board no matter what it is. If you're in your head, spinning your brain about how you're going to get where you want to be, you never actually take the steps to get there. So that's where just focusing on the activity and trusting the process instead of the results are the best way to go, because the results will come. They will come if you are consistently doing the activities that get them there, that get you to those results. And it's okay not to have all the answers right away, because that's how we learn, and growth takes time and consistency. So do the things that get you to the goal. Don't spend so much time running around the goal that you want to be at that you never actually take the steps to get there. And it doesn't always make sense right away. But if you have an expert, an instructor, a business mentor, whatever the case may be, who is telling you these are the activities that are going to help make you successful, do the activities and do them consistently and work at them. The results will come. So the next tip was to stretch and challenge yourself by participating fully, even when it's uncomfortable. That kind of goes along with that whole being open to new ideas and stepping out of your comfort zone thing. It's important to embrace that discomfort as a pathway to growth, because if you've watched me before, you know that I firmly believe nothing ever grows in a comfort zone. And I think I've already said that once today. So make sure you're stepping outside of a comfort zone in small, manageable ways. And we've talked about this before, trying tiny little new things. If you're trying to change your diet, it starts with very simple moves. If you want to try to run, it starts with a walk where maybe you run for 2 minutes and then you walk the rest of the way. Baby steps. Rarely ever do people take giant steps and get to their goal, or giant steps, one giant step that leads to this miraculous change. It is always tiny little steps that get us there. So take the initiative, embrace a little bit of discomfort. Just like I said, sometimes when don't have any appointments outside of the house and I'm here for 4 days in a row working my business and working my remote job and doing school, and then a mixer comes up and I'm like, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to see people. That's me not wanting to step out of my comfort zone. And I know I have to. Okay. But Donna, if you spend too much time here by yourself, you're going to get inside your own head. You're going to start slipping into that depression, because I'm an extroverted introvert. So I am innately social. And And so like I said, I have to get out of I know that if I spend too much time here by myself, or even just with my boyfriend, who is awesome, where I'm not around other people, it's going to be harder each time for me to get out there and be around other people. And that's going to feed that social anxiety. And I don't want that to rear its ugly head again. So challenge yourself, stretch yourself. And this was stretch and challenge yourself by participating fully, even when it's uncomfortable. That was the tip. And that was absolutely true. And that's what we were doing the whole weekend. 4 days we spent stretching and challenging ourselves within that group with these people we didn't know, learning about each other, learning about ourselves, accepting feedback from virtual strangers, literally and figuratively, and learning new things about ourselves and each other. But you can't do that if you don't dive in. I'm a bit of a loner. We know that. I've talked about that before. So my inclination, especially after being in a room with 16 other people, all people-y, was each time we got a break to run somewhere in a corner and hide. And I sometimes did for a few minutes, but I still went and met up with them and had breakfast and had lunch, because those two things were provided for us, and made sure that I was working on those relationships outside of that classroom, and stretching and taking myself out of that comfort zone. So again, how do we do that? We take baby steps towards the things that we want. We try new things, even if it's a new vegetable, or like I said, a new activity. We try new things, that are not the things that we do all the time, that are not the things that we do so that we can make mistakes and we can learn from them and we can get better with practice, right? And overcoming that discomfort, again, is the key, or a key, to pushing past the feelings of inadequacy that feed, and finding confidence so that we're not feeding that imposter syndrome anymore. So another tip was to take risks early and often, because it's okay to make mistakes. Kind of just touched on that a little bit. Taking calculated risks and learning from mistakes is how we get better. We are so afraid to fail, but that's how we learn the best. I'd rather and in counseling, when it comes to counseling, I would rather make the mistakes now than later, right? I'd rather make the mistakes with my cohorts, with my practice clients, while I have supervision, than when I'm in my own private practice and I don't have any backup, which we always have systems of backup, but that's another story for another day. But I'd much rather make the mistakes when there's an opportunity for someone else to help me learn from them. Wouldn't you? So, a growth mindset means that failures are seen as opportunities for learning. And it's most important in this situation, not only to take the risks and make the mistakes, but own them when you make them. I can remember, good morning, Miss Peggy. I can remember in the first couple of years on my previous job, the job that I retired from, and I was responsible for proofing and putting together a membership directory. And I made a major mistake. Major mistake. I mean, we're talking to the tune of a minimum of $1,000 lost by the company. And I was terrified. Y'all, I hadn't been there very long. I'd been there like a year and a half. I was sure I was going to lose my job. I was absolutely positive. And it would have been really easy for me to try to push that blame somewhere else, because it was a fuzzy situation and the blame could have been pushed. But I knew I made the mistake. So I admitted it and I owned it. And I didn't lose my job, obviously, because I ended up there for 22 years. But more importantly, because I owned it and because I had that fear and that panic and realized what I did and what my choices were as far as could I take the blame, could I push the blame, and all of that, in the process, what I learned was I never made that mistake again. Let me tell you, I didn't need anybody else or my boss to put systems in place to keep me from making that mistake again, because when I learn my lessons the hard way, I make sure I don't have to repeat those lessons. So it's okay to make the mistakes, but it's also important we don't learn from them if we don't own them. So it's also equally important to own those mistakes when we make them, not beat ourselves up over them, because I did that too. Not beat ourselves up over the mistakes, because we can't change what's happened. But the most important thing, anytime you're taking a risk, is that you're probably going to make a mistake. You're not always going to be successful at something right out of the gate. I made plenty of mistakes during residency. I was the first mock counselor to come out with, how does that make you feel? Which is kind of a no-no phrase these days. Like my first role play, it was like one of the first things out of my mouth. How does that make you feel? And as soon as it's like one of those things where you can see the words coming out of your mouth and you're trying to pull them back and they're not coming back because it's too late. We can't do anything about what's already done. What we can do is learn. I didn't ask that question the rest of the weekend. So take the risks. It's okay to make the mistakes as long as we learn from them and don't get stuck in that, beat ourselves up, or push the blame elsewhere and not take responsibility. And then the final tip for surviving residency was to sleep, because you're going to need all of your energy, and self-care is essential. And boy, did that turn out to be true in more ways than we could have imagined. Let's face it, when we go to hotels, we go to strange places, strange houses, strange Airbnbs, whatever, we often don't sleep as well. When we're traveling, when we're in new situations, we don't sleep as well because we're nervous and our anxiety has got us spinning. So we're having trouble getting to sleep. We're in a strange place. Well, all of us ended up getting sick. And I'm sure that part of the reason was because most of us were short on sleep, because we either weren't sleeping well or we weren't sleeping long enough because we were trying to get time in Orlando outside of the activities that were going on, because we were in residency from 8 to 5 almost every day except the last day. So we were trying to get time in. Some of us brought our families, our significant others, whatever. And that we were trying to get that fun time into, that relaxation time. And unfortunately, what that often means is, what's the first thing to go? The first thing to go is sleep. So rest, recovery, and self-care are crucial to physical, emotional, and mental well-being. Well, it's not like we haven't talked about that before. That is across the board in every situation. We are better physically, mentally, and emotionally if we are taking care of ourselves and giving our bodies and our brains the minimal things that they need, which are rest and recovery. Self-care, that can be anything from prayer, meditation, diet, exercise, affirmations, time alone, boundaries. If you have ever watched any of my videos, you already know I talk about this on a regular basis. It seems to be those are the things that overlap almost every single topic that can fall under wellness. So make sure you're getting your rest, your recovery, and your self-care. It helps to mitigate burnout, whatever the situation may be. Whether people get burnout when they're volunteering, people get burnout when they're working, they get burnout on school. Almost any situation can be a burnout situation if you allow it. And burnout is a common contributor to those feelings of inadequacy that feed imposter syndrome. So those were the tips that came to us for surviving residency. Not only did every one of them turn out to be true, but they definitely all apply across the board to real life. In almost any situation, you can apply them in some form or fashion. So I hope you found that helpful. Remember, the biggest thing I learned is that most people in new situations are experiencing the same thing in different ways. I walked over there thinking, what am I doing here? I don't have these skills. What am I thinking? I shouldn't be in this field. I should go back to what I know. And I was far from the only one in that group that was feeling that way. Some people spoke it. Some people didn't. Some people said it earlier. Some people said it later. But what we all knew was that we were there because we needed to learn the skills and we needed to learn the things. And we all also learned, after we finally got our feedback from the residency, we all also learned we were a lot better at it than we gave ourselves credit for when we went. So that's really important. And if that's not a teaching moment all of in itself, then I don't know what is. So that's a great lesson, is oftentimes we have ourselves so wound up and so worried about things that don't end up being that big of a deal. I mean, it was a big deal, but we all found out that we were better at it than we thought we were. And that's a huge step in the right direction, right? So remember that most people in new situations are experiencing exactly the same thing you are. And they're just doing it in different ways. Sometimes they talk about it. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it comes out in physical manifestation, etc. Teachers come in all forms and disguises. That's the second thing I want you to remember. My favorite quote from Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was the founder of the death and dying movement, the hospice movement.
Teachers come in all forms and disguises. I absolutely believe that to be true, and I found that to be the case here during residency as well. And then most importantly, I want you to remember to continue reflecting all the time on how you can challenge yourself to grow in whatever the appropriate situation is, because as long as we're growing and learning, we are not stagnating. We are continuing to evolve. So I hope you found that helpful. I know it was a little bit long. If you did, please share. Please drop a comment. Message me if there's that. Everything's starting to move in my head again. If you have a topic you'd like to see me cover, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to learn, obviously. I'll be happy to do the research. No politics, no negativity. There's enough going on with politics right now. We don't need to talk about it here. And I really hope you found that helpful. And if you want to see that video that I originally did on imposter syndrome, or if you need to see the video I did last week because you missed it, let me know. I'll drop the link in the comments. I may do that anyway on last week's video. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a fabulous Wednesday, a fabulous week, and most importantly, be well. I'll see you next Wednesday. Bye.